Welcome to the RVA Small Business Show, your number one resource for business growth education, insights, and news. Let's get today's show started.
Welcome to the RVA Small Business Show exclusively on the RVA Small Business Network. I'm Corey Mosley, your host for today's show. Many believe there is an urgent need and big opportunity for businesses and organizations to strengthen their understanding of inclusion and disability culture and the issues that affect this population. Thankfully, there are common sense and cost-effective solutions to address disability-related concerns to broaden society's understanding and appreciation for those with disabilities. Joining me in the studio today is Matthew Shapiro of Six Wheels Consulting. As America's Disability Advisor, Six Wheels Consulting was created to work with those in both the private and public sectors to assist them in expanding their understanding of disabilities and inclusion. Matthew, welcome to the show today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So what does Six Wheels do?
So many things. So Six Wheels was started to really challenge the way people think about, talk about, and approach disability inclusion and disability issues in our communities. We achieve our work in three main buckets. We do consulting efforts, we do public speaking initiatives in businesses and all around other environments, and then I'm also a registered lobbyist in the Virginia General Assembly where I lobby on behalf of disability issues for people with disabilities. We have been working since 2014, and I love what I do. Every day I get to engage with people and really challenge the way we think about, talk about, and approach disability every day and everything that we do. So
absolutely.
Awesome.
Well, so let's get into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So from a company perspective, what are some of the areas that you feel that, companies and organizations maybe aren't focusing enough on when it comes to being more inclusive in what you refer to as disability aware?
Yeah. So the disability population is probably, if not the largest minority groups, one of the largest minority groups that exists. And I think that often it is the most untalked about minority group compared to people of color, LGBTQIA+, and different things like that. There are 64 million Americans in this country who live with disabilities. And disability is the only minority group any of us can join in the blink of an eye, because we may get into an accident or we may get sick and or something may happen drastically where our life is just different. And we're all going to eventually join the disability community as we age and get older. So there's a huge population of people that we could be doing so much more of a better job in serving, and businesses need to understand that. The disability community has about $220 billion in discretionary income. And so there is a market there where one of the reasons that we don't spend the money in our communities is because we can't navigate those communities. And those communities aren't accessible and fully inclusive.
What do you mean?
Yeah, so good question. So, if I have to go to a movie or a space, what I always have to do first is make sure that I can even get into that space in the first place, right? Sometimes there are steps, sometimes they are accessible based on the ADA, and sometimes they're not. But let's say I go to a space and there is something that I want to buy in that store, but I can't get in. So I might not be spending that money in that store, because if I can't even take the first step of getting into that store to then buy that item, you're losing out on a potential sale.
So let me ask you a follow-up.
Yeah,
there.
please.
So in an example, because you mentioned the ADA,
yeah,
there's a lot of rules, obviously. Is it because of grandfathering? Because you can't build a building now commercially that excludes.
Yeah, correct.
Right?
You cannot do that. And it is sort of, yes, a grandfather in thing. I've heard within our community that that's kind of a real bogus excuse as to why people don't make things accessible. And that's where we come in as Six Wheels, is like, what can we do? Like, let's say you have an older building. What can we do to make this accessible, right? Can you invest in a portable ramp that costs you $100 that if a patron with a disability came to your space, you put that ramp out and that person now can hopefully access your space. When you're in your space, do you lay it out in a way that is very maneuverable for somebody who uses a wheelchair, for somebody who is blind or visually impaired, for somebody who may have a service animal? Have you thought about what your inside of your organization looks like? Or do you have open floor plans? Do you have a lot of free space to move about your space? A lot of times in businesses, we have a lot of extras that are in our spaces, like boxes, or we put 50 chairs in the space when we really only need 25, right? And so those additional 25 chairs then become a barrier to me being able to fully navigate the space. And so it's things like that, those common sense things that are not necessarily ADA compliant things, but if you removed those barriers, you instantly become more inclusive to somebody like me.
All right, you've piqued my interest in a lot of different areas. My mind, as you're talking, I've got 72 questions that are coming up. Here's one that I think is really interesting from a marketing perspective.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of sensitivity to people many times wanting to be more inclusive, particularly in this area that you say, does get ignored and that people don't give the same attention as they may race or other areas.
Correct.
From a marketing perspective, how do you recommend a company market without feeling like they're pandering or feeling like they're being disingenuous to showcase they are doing these things for people with disabilities?
Yeah, so I think authenticity is key. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes when I'm talking to businesses, that's one of the things that comes up is like, how are we marketing to potential employees? How are we showcasing ourselves as businesses? And so one of the things I always say, oftentimes we tend to use clip art, right? And we go on the internet and we type in person with a disability, right? And it'll come up with a stock image photo of what is pretty clearly a situation where they have put an actor in a wheelchair and said, okay, quote unquote, you are disabled, like good for you. But that's not an authentic representation of me or somebody like me, because you can pretty quickly tell, like, okay, that is clearly staged because that person is in like a hospital wheelchair compared to mine, which my chair is a $32,000 piece of equipment, right? And so you can pretty quickly discern, like, okay, that's fake versus Matthew is actually a disabled individual. So we need to be finding those individuals, and for imagery's sake, like hiring them to be part of our marketing campaigns so that authenticity shines through.
Interesting.
As a potential employee, one of the first things I do is I go online and see if anybody looks like me. I go on their website, I see if they have a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, and if they do, does it include disability as part of that language? If it does, then I feel more empowered and more emboldened to say, okay, that organization gets it. And I don't have to go in there and be the quote unquote guinea pig to be the first of someone to go into that business space.
Now, you can write a statement.
Yes.
You got to live the statement too, though, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it needs to.
Are you holding people accountable in that way when you're working with clients?
I try to, right? It's a scenario where you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink the water.
Yeah.
Right. And I love all of my clients that I work with. When I do assessments or when I'm speaking or any of those things, right, I give them suggestions. And do I hope that they do them? Yes. Do I sit there and hold their feet to the fire? I can't, because I'm working a million different angles on different things.
Right.
So my hope is that I give you the strategies, and this is something that we talk about quite a bit. People often think like, I can watch one of Matthew's programs and then I now understand disability inclusion.
Problem solved, check the box.
Right, you check the box and you're done. That's the starting point, right? So what you really need to be doing is you need to watch my program, and then you need to go back as an organization and develop a full-fledged plan of like, how are we going to implement disability inclusion in everything that we're doing as an organization? How are we going to recruit people? How are we going to hire people? How are we going to show that within our building and our culture? And then one of the other big things too is how are we going to promote advancement so that if somebody sees that Matthew has talent, how can we cultivate Matthew's talent to maybe have him one day be the boss, right? Because you don't see a lot of people with disabilities in upper level management positions in our organizations. And so we need to change that. How do we change that, right? We recruit them appropriately, and then we give them support and help them move up the corporate ladder.
So you started answering a couple of my follow-ups here in there. Thank you. And one was, what are some of your top priorities when going into an organization? And I'm just going to button hook that, and I'll let you knock out both of them. Is for companies that are saying and may watch this and say, you know what, we want to get more involved. We haven't paid attention how we should. Right. Where do we start? I'm going to let you package those two together.
So you start by calling me, and then
good answer, fair answer.
And then I would love to work with new clients, right? But a starting point is thinking about, okay, how can we bring people together from our organization to really develop a plan, right? And also think about if we have individuals with disabilities in our organization, we need to make sure they're at the table, right? Because everyone has good intentions, right? But if it's all able-bodied people thinking about how they would make things accessible, you're missing the mark. You need to have people with disabilities at the table, because I see the world through a seated lens every day, right? And businesses talk about, we want people who are outside of the box thinkers. We want people who are creative thinkers. We want people who can problem solve in unique ways. That is what the disability community does every second of every day of every moment of our lives. Right. And so we need to bring that into our workspaces. And what data has shown is that if you bring that into your workspace, it permeates everyone else in the organization. And when they are around people like me, they start thinking in that way too. And they start thinking creatively, uniquely, and all of those things. So you start by creating a plan. You then actually execute the plan, right? Oftentimes when we create diversity plans, we write up this beautiful plan, and then it sits on the shelf and nothing gets done about it. So it's great that you can write a plan and say you have a plan, but then the most important key is to execute said plan and genuinely and authentically execute the plan, right? Don't just do it for the sake of doing it, but do it because it's good for business.
Yes.
So if you do some of those things, you're definitely on the right track. And it's not a situation that you do those things and then you're done. It really does this becomes part of every aspect of every organization, of everything that we do in the business. And I think if you do those things and start doing those things, you're off to a good start.
All right, so we've spent several minutes on companies. I want to talk about the lobbying work that you mentioned earlier on. What are some of those initiatives that you are trying to raise awareness on when it comes to public sectors, governmental change, policy?
Yeah, so you're in my wheelhouse because I'm the biggest political nerd on the planet, so this is perfect. But as I said, I lobby for an organization called the Virginia Association of People Supporting Employment First. And so that means that we want people with disabilities working in competitive integrated employment outcomes for at or above minimum wage. And so one of our biggest challenges that we were recently able to finally work to get off the books this past General Assembly session, it was this idea of shelter workshops, which is basically where people with disabilities would go to be with other people with disabilities. They're not integrated in the community with non-disabled folks. And also, they would have been paid sub-minimum wage. So, they are doing work where they're like putting things in bags and they're making $2 an hour, right? So it is a very arcane system and how that works. And I think a lot of that is based off of not believing that people with disabilities can work in competitive integrated settings, families having fear of, what does Matthew do if he scrapes his arm or something bad happens, right? And that's a dignity of risk concept, right? So, you have to trust that your child will be okay. A lot of that fear comes from families and parents.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
What do some companies know that do, because I do go in organizations and I can see inclusive practices.
Yes.
Like Publix comes to mind
Right.
as a company.
Right.
What do they know that makes it where they're perfectly comfortable and lean into it that the average small business owner isn't considering?
Yeah, so they know that people with disabilities are good workers, right? They're going to show up. They're going to be incredibly grateful for the job opportunity that, we'll use Publix as the example. They're going to look at that and say, be incredibly grateful for that. We hope that Publix is paying those workers good wages. We hope that they're giving them opportunities for advancement. And so you then ask the question, well, if Publix is doing it, right, why aren't other businesses doing it? And that really comes down to a couple of things. They don't know where to start.
Okay.
And they don't want to say or do the wrong thing, right? So in terms of where to start, you, again, cheap plug, but work with someone like me to let me help guide you on what are good practices to do, right? Thinking about your physical structures, thinking about your websites, thinking about your recruitment strategies, thinking about your interview strategies, like kind of going through the whole gamut of what a situation could look like. Do you have an accommodations process? Do you have like a safe way for someone to disclose that they have a disability? Because a lot of times people are afraid to disclose because they feel that there might be pushback or some kind of negative ramification that if they say they need accommodation or they need to work from home 2 days a week, right, they may lose their job. But maybe they're doing that because their disability requires them to do that, right?
Gotcha.
So if they are good at their job and you want to keep talented people, you make that work, right? And you set up an environment where somebody doesn't feel fear or worry that if they disclose, like something negative will happen.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So, Matthew, we're just about on time.
Sure.
But what I want to ask as the last question is from a success standpoint.
Yes.
What do you want a client to come away with after working with you?
Yeah, so a different way of thinking, right? And a different way of thinking about the world, right? I want them to always have disability on their mind moving forward, right? So often disability is an afterthought in many instances. And so my hope is, once they've engaged with me, they realize, okay, it's not really that hard, right? And there's nothing to really be afraid of. The other thing I hope for is return business, to be completely blunt and honest.
Yeah.
I love my clients that I work with, right? And many of them are return clients, and they see the value that disability inclusion can bring to the workplace. There are tons of people with disabilities who are ready, willing, and able to work. They're waiting for the rest of society to catch up and to realize, yes, these are very talented people. These are qualified people, right? We're not giving them this job out of pity, out of, the goodness of our hearts. We're doing it because they're the most qualified and ready and willing and able candidates to fill those job roles.
Wow. Powerful stuff, Matthew.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for joining us today.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
You're
It's a
absolutely
pleasure
welcome.
to be here.
For more information on the services that Six Wheels Consulting provides, please visit them online at sixwheelsconsulting.com. This has been another episode of the RVA Small Business Show, RVA's only online streaming video network dedicated to small business growth, education, trends, and news. I'm Corey Mosley, and I will see you next time.
This has been another episode of the RVA Small Business Show, presented by the RVA Small Business Network. Be sure to like, share, and join our newsletter at RVASBN.com.